Happy 245th birthday, United States of America is never the way that I will start a sermon. I say 45th? Did I say 41st? Isn't it the 45th? Someone correct him. I won't do it from here. Okay. On this day, I can never forget. I always remember what my dad told me about himself that I would have never guessed. A prolific student of history, understood authoritarian governments, understood the history of this nation, understood the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, understands the ins and outs of Marxism and things like that. He understood all of the authoritarian threats to any sort of a free society. And yet one day my dad told me, he said, you know, I'm probably the least patriotic person you'll ever meet. I was kind of stunned because he didn't appear that way. But it was because even though he could appreciate and understand the physical freedoms, the physical blessings that we have at this time, it didn't blind him at all to his true allegiance. In fact, he didn't care much for the Pledge of Allegiance, just for the simple fact that he said, I don't want to pledge to my allegiance to anyone except Christ. It rubs me the wrong way. And I didn't agree with my dad on necessarily everything, and I appreciated his conclusions on a lot of things. But that was always something that really got me. I was invited to go, and I guess I'll just throw this restaurant under the bus. I was invited to go to what's it called? Peter Piper? I can't even say it. The triple P, right? Peter Piper Pizza? Tug Twister Pizza. That's where we're going. I was invited to go there, and if you know anything about the place, it's what? It's kids running around and mediocre pizza, right? That's pretty much all it is, right? And so I told him, I said, you know, one time I was in Cameroon, which was a French colony, which is not as good as some place that was a British colony, okay? It was a French colony, which means it was a little bit dirtier, and sin was a little more prolific. You're driving down the road in the theater, one of the posters out in front of the theater would be a naked woman, where it was like a porno along with Mission Impossible, and, you know, some Steven Spielberg movie, right? And it was just a lot different than where my brother and sister are from in Ghana. It was dirtier. I was happy that I had my own bucket of water at my hotel room. There wasn't even running water. And I remember one day, it was around noon. I'm on the equator. I am literally at a sub-sewer level of downtown. We walked across the open sewer, and I walked downhill into the bowels of the city, 20 or 25 feet below the sewer level, to where we were going, where one of these sweet ladies that went to church with us lived. And she wanted us to talk to her neighbors. And there I watched where a mother gave a child a bath. The child was probably 7 or 8, maybe older, I don't know. Gave them a bath out of a bowl of water while they were standing in the dirt. And there were flies all around me, and it's hotter than you can imagine, hotter than here. And I'm trying to just sit and have a Bible study with a whole family of people. And I just remember thinking at that moment was the first time I ever experienced wanting to jump out of my own skin. I was so out of my comfort zone. I was younger than Mark and BJ. I was only 25. And I just remember being totally out of my comfort zone, and I was just kind of looking around, and it was, well, I told the guys today, I said, Piper, I can't even say it. The pizza place is a little bit worse than that. I told them, I said, I don't want to go. But I remember when I got back, one of the first things that I realized when I got back to the United States was how smooth the roads are. I just remember going down the interstate, and I thought, wow, this is what it's like to be in a car and not feel like you're being jolted to death. And I really understood for the first time in my life what it felt like to actually want to kiss the ground when your plane landed. When we were in Costa Rica, door knocking a few years ago, Costa Rica is a little different. And if we ever go to Costa Rica, and for some reason, Araceli doesn't come back with us, it's because she stayed. because we were there and she's like, this is pretty nice here. I think I could just kind of blend right in, right? She could blend right in. Talks the language. It's really nice. It was really nice there. But most of us were glad to get back, even at a place that was a little tempting to want to stay. In Philippians chapter 1, and yes, we are studying through the book of Philippians, and we are in chapter 1, but that's okay. In Philippians chapter 1, Paul is talking about a struggle about where he wants to be, a struggle about where he wants to go, a struggle about being in one place, but understand that he needs to go to another place. Like when I was about to jump out of my skin and I was thinking, where's the next plane out of this place? Because I belonged somewhere else, at least within my comfort zone and my sensibilities at that time. And I'm not bragging about how I felt. That was something that was a good growing process for me. But I felt pulled from where I was. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 21, Paul says, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which I shall choose I cannot tell. I'm hard-pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith, so that in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus because of my coming to you." Again, we'll stop for just a second here. Where is he writing this from? Again, prison, right? And he's gone through so much already. You just read through 2 Corinthians. He gives the list there of all the things that he's been through. He was someone, of all the people in the New Testament, and we'll get to Jesus in a little while, of all the people in the New Testament who at any given moment might want to jump out of their skin, that they just want to hit the abort button, and eject button, and just get out of the situation that they're in that moment. And Paul said, I really do want to hit the eject button. I do really wish that it was all over. I really wish that I could just go to where I belong. But I still have some business here for now. But I know it's just temporary. I know that. Death is coming. And he wasn't afraid of it. He understood that death was the means by which he would go to where he belonged. But notice the next verse, just the beginning of the next verse. Philippians 1:27. And this is an interesting thing that I uncovered in just my study of Philippians that I didn't know until I studied this. He says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ." Okay, this phrase, at least in the English Standard Version, "let your manner of life be." That's one word in the Greek. And it's a word that sounds something like politeuomai. And it's very close to where we get the word politics from, or polity, or polis, or polis, P-O-L-I-S, which was a word for city. And an appropriate translation of this actually would have been only live as citizens worthy of the gospel of Christ. Now, isn't it interesting, this term that most translations, I don't know of any translations, it's mentioned, maybe mentioned in your footnote or somewhere in a commentary in your Bible. It may mention that somewhere like that, this is an alternate way of, or a more literal way of translating this. Because as you'll see, the noun, that's a verb, the noun form of this would be translated citizen or citizenship. And so this description here has to do with a way of life that is attached to a particular place. And so let's read it again. "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ." Only let the way that you live as a citizen of what? be worthy of the gospel of Christ. You know, when you think about Jesus and where Jesus is, his life and his, you might say, his trajectory to where he is now, it would have seemed really weird if he would have, say, opened a 401k and started a retirement fund. That would have just been a little weird. It wouldn't have made any sense. In John 18, verse 36, Jesus is answering Pilate. He's there before Pilate, and he says this, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my citizens would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from the world." And really, it's a beautiful thing that he states this, but also understands that he, the Father, the Spirit, are not the only citizens of his kingdom, but that he has servants of his kingdom, and he has gone to make a place ready for us. You go a few chapters back to chapter 14, and you could probably quote this. John 14, starting in verse 1, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms or many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you that I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also." And so we have this idea of him going and preparing a place. There are a lot of takes on this. He absolutely went to the cross and prepared a place for us in the kingdom. But he's going to receive us to this place. It isn't just that he went to prepare us a spiritual reality, but that he actually went to prepare a place for us to be brought to with him. A kingdom that's not of this world. Paul understood very well, Jesus even understood very well, that everyone's going to die. I mentioned that this morning. If we woke up every morning understanding my life's a vapor, this could be the last day, and that there isn't any single one of us that's going to get out of this world alive, then how would that change things? How would we live? If we really lived like we believe that, what would be different? Jesus is the King. He has all authority. He is sovereign. He has established his kingdom. And we are citizens of the kingdom. We don't belong here. We've never belonged here. If you go down a couple of chapters in the book of Philippians to chapter 3, look at verses 20 and 21, and this is probably the passage that came to mind when I mentioned the alternate translation of chapter 1, verse 27. Philippians 3:20 says, "But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body, by the power that enables him even to subject all things to himself." One of the things that I've tried to do with Alex is little things like, don't throw your trash on the ground. That's being a bad citizen. When you think of the idea of how you treat the environment or the society or the neighborhood that you live, how you do things that either positively or negatively affect the people that are around you. And so that's something that he's lived up to, is this idea of being a good citizen. And when you go back to chapter 1 and verse 27, when he says, make your manner of life or your citizenship, there is a good principle in the idea of just being a good citizen, even if it's not attached to something that's eternal. But even just momentarily, being good to your neighbors is really that idea. It's a way that we conduct ourselves in a society that we find ourselves in, that we grow up into. But in chapter 3, we have, and who can tell me, who remembers what the heading title for chapter 3 is when I did the quick overview of Philippians? Does anybody remember that? Sort of a paraphrase. That we have a citizenship that's in heaven, and Paul says that we need to get anything, cut anything out of our lives that would jeopardize our citizenship. Well, Philippians 3 verse 20 says our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await our Savior. So Jesus is in heaven, we are awaiting him, who, verse 21, will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body. We don't belong here. This isn't the nature of existence that God has planned for us. It's something different. Whatever Jesus' glorious body is, that's what our bodies are going to be transformed into. And he says in particular, by the power that enables him even to subject all things to himself, Jesus has the power to transform our bodies into something that we really can't quite imagine. We don't know really how to describe the eternal body, the eternal consciousness, the eternal spirit. We don't really know what that means. But he says that is where we really belong. Not here. Not here. Abraham thought this way too. Abraham's a great example of this. This is one of my favorite passages in Hebrews chapter 11 because of just the matter-of-fact description of the way that he lived and the way that he faced life. In Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 8, the author records this: "By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise as in a foreign land." And so you think about this. I'm going to give you land. So he goes to the promised land that calls him out of this country. Go to a place that you've never seen before. He just has faith and he goes. But he lives there how? He lives there as if it were a foreign land. He doesn't treat it like it's home. He says, living there in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. Verse 10, "For he was looking forward to the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God." All of the struggle in the Middle East essentially has to do with a squabble over several acres of land. Maybe a few more than, maybe square miles, right? It's not very much. There was a promise that was made to Abraham. The Jews say that they are entitled to it. Yes, there was the fulfillment of the promise to the descendants of Abraham. They went in, they got the land. But Abraham, when he went to live in that area, it wasn't an established kingdom that he went and was the king the king of his own kingdom there. Yes, he had a large family. He had his own private army. But you remember, he paid 10% to who? Do you remember? To Melchizedek, the king of Salem and high priest of Salem. And so he even answered to someone. Of course, Melchizedek is representative of Christ, right? But when he went into this land that was a promise to him that he would receive as an inheritance, he went in, and the whole time that he lived there, he didn't live there like it was home. It says he was living and waiting and looking for a city that has foundations, or a city that cannot be shaken, a city that is eternal. I'm reading between the lines here a little bit. Whose builder and maker is God. And we have such a great example from him. When you think about the different places, say, that I mentioned visiting, and I'm sure you've had your own experiences. You know, it could just be you went to visit a part of this country that you thought, no, I need to get back to Texas, right? Or something like that. But the more that you feel out of place, the more in this life we feel rejected, as I mentioned this morning, even mocked for us thinking about eternity, the more we know we don't belong here. I mentioned this morning about being willing to be the crazy person, being the weirdo, being peculiar, being someone who is rejected. I've heard it said this way, that the idea of being rejected from this world is sort of our unofficial passport to heaven. That's sort of the fruits of whether or not we are a citizen of a place other than this. Because we aren't just going along to get along. We aren't perpetuating the idea and the lives of people who live here and see it as the ultimate thing. We see something else as ultimate. In John 15:18 and following, Jesus says, "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own, but because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." And in 1 John 3:13, kind of echoing back to our lesson about being surprised at what Jesus told us, John says, 1 John 3:13, "Do not be surprised, brothers, that the world hates you." I want to share with you another thing that C.S. Lewis said, as I did this morning. This one's not as long. He said this: "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." And I love that idea that anything, and I know I have this conversation with a few people, and it seems to be a recurring conversation I have with Kelly, that there isn't anything about the flesh that can ever be fully satisfied. Not anything about it. The more you try to satisfy any part of the flesh, the more you'll find out that you can't satisfy it. The more that you will need. Which leads us to this idea, and there is actually something called the intuitional argument for the existence of God. That we know, we can tell there is something more that I need. There is something else. I mentioned my dad earlier let me tell you, my dad was really an oddball. I'm really normal compared to my dad. But he was as sweet as can be, and actually, you probably wouldn't think he was weird. In fact, he would withhold from saying the things that most people would think would be weird, because he was at such a much higher level than everyone else. To the extent that he really lived like Abraham lived. There was something about him in really his everyday life where he was at ease and he was content, but he lived like he didn't fit in. Things didn't feel right. He didn't really like this place. And I'm trying to become like that. Where more and more, it's not that I don't love the people of the world or understand my mission here or appreciate the good things that I have, but it's just the older I get, the more this place, it is more unsettling and less fulfilling. It didn't take us long to come to a conclusion about what to put on his gravestone at his graveside. It just says, "Citizen of Heaven." Now, I never heard of that being put on a tombstone before, and it is a little weird. But those who knew him thought, well, that's the only thing that really describes him. Because he lived here like a stranger. He did. This was strange to him. He didn't fit in. We weren't made for this world. Jesus has chosen us to be out of this world. Jesus has chosen everyone to be out of this world. And even when this world is terrible and difficult, we still love it to our detriment. In Exodus 14 and verse 10, Moses records this, Exodus 14:10, "When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, 'Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians?' for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians, whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. And then the Red Sea was parted, they went through, and the Egyptians were destroyed. In the book of Numbers, the people leave Sinai, and they're thirsty, and they're hungry, and they're whining and complaining again, and they essentially say the same thing. Weren't there all these different types of vegetables and foods and things in Egypt? We would have been happy there. Timothy Keller is a sort of a prominent theologian today. I don't agree with everything that he says, but he has some good nuggets sometimes. And in describing idolatry recently, he said this: idolatry is this, that it's taking a good thing and making it an ultimate thing. The way I like to think of it is this: it's taking something that's good and turning it into an ultimate good. Whenever this day rolls around, just because I'm a Christian, just because I'm a citizen of heaven, this day, while reminding me of the blessings, the physical blessings that God gives us, and having an appreciation for the freedoms that I have and the people that have done things for me, because I am Christian, this day always just really reminds me of my ultimate home. It reminds me of my true home. It reminds me of where I really belong. It reminds me of where my true citizenship is. If you remember what I quoted from C.S. Lewis this morning, he mentions that nations, that civilizations are, when compared to us, like the life of a gnat. They are here and then they are gone, and this nation will be gone one day, and it won't even matter that we were citizens of this nation. It just won't matter. And so when this day, whenever this day comes around, because my mind, I try to set my mind on things eternal, my mind automatically goes to where I really belong, where my real citizenship is. You know, there's a widespread accusation that people are people have a problem with patriotism and making it idolatrous. It's a broad brush statement, and I have witnessed it. But for the most part, the Christians that I know, they are good at just saying thanks to God, while understanding that eternity waits. There are people who have been so consumed with whatever it is in front of them. For some people, it's patriotism, but that's probably a pretty small sliver of the society. But what we can be absolutely certain about is that Satan is trying, in each of our individual lives, he's trying to make something in our life an idol for us, something that's good. He's trying to get us to make it the ultimate good. You see, when we have Jesus as King and we have eternity in mind, then what will we do? As Paul talks about it in Philippians 3, I count everything as garbage, as rubbish, that I may have Christ, that I may know Him, that I may share in His sufferings. He's like, the citizenship that I have in heaven, well, that's worth sacrificing everything for. And the way that you know that something has become idolatrous is when you take that ultimate good, that ultimately good thing of Jesus, of unity with the Father, Son, and the Spirit for eternity in heaven, and you are willing to even momentarily sacrifice that to something that, while good, is not an ultimate good. That's when it becomes an idol. When we sacrifice the ultimate good for something that isn't eternal. If you go down a few verses in Hebrews chapter 11, I want to end with something here. And don't worry, I was planning for this to be a shorter lesson, sort of kind of balance from this morning. Hebrews 11, verse 13. Still talking about Abraham and about their mindset. Hebrews 11:13, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, the people of faith, they lived here like strangers because they understood that God had a place waiting for them, an ultimate city that has foundations. And because of that, he was not ashamed to be called their God. Isn't that an amazing thing? I know my life, and you know your life better than I know your life. God has every right to be ashamed of us. But when we are willing to live as strangers here, looking forward to the place that he has taken us out of this world to be, that's when God looks at us and says, I'm not ashamed to be called your God, because you have put nothing in front of being with me. I sort of mentioned the idea of Jesus earlier, but I want you to think about this for a second. When you look at the account of Jesus' life, or if you just think of him just as the story of Jesus, just as a historical character, nothing really about his life points us to the idea that he was living here like he was going to stay around for a while. There isn't anything about the way that he lived or the way that he talked, his interaction with the material world or with money or with anything like that, that would lead us to believe that he was living in such a way that he had any interest in building up any sort of treasure on earth. Jesus came, he came ready to leave. He came as a stranger. Jesus was living by faith with eternal eyes, just like Abraham and his sons and Sarah and all of those who lived and died by faith. They understood that where they really belonged was not here. And Jesus understood that this is just for a moment. I am coming to finish the work, and then it's time to go. But there are so many of us who daily are tempted to fall into this mindset of just getting comfortable here. Sort of like the Sadducees, thinking about the little technicalities of how life is going to play out as I age or get older. We don't find anything like that in Jesus' life. We see really in Jesus someone who did not build up a great military following, as he says. Well, my kingdom is not like that. He didn't really hold any type of political office or religious leadership type of an office. There isn't a place that you can go and this is where Jesus grew up. This is his house. You know, most historical figures, you can go and find the house they were born in or grew up in. You can't find that with Jesus. He essentially left without a trace except the truth and the eyewitness testimony. He came living here, ready to go. Jesus came and lived as a stranger. And the more and more I do lessons here and we study through things, the more and more I go back to this constant reminder that we need to pattern ourselves after the divine pattern. That Jesus' life was a life where he lived here, you might say, uncomfortably. He knew that it wasn't to be, you might say, savored so that he might want to stay around for a while. He came, lived as a stranger, was ready to go. When he accomplished his task, he was ready. That's the struggle that Paul went through. Between death and between life, he's like, well, I don't really belong here. I'm ready to go home. But I don't think my work is complete yet. And so as long as my work isn't complete, then I think I'm going to stay around. And one of the things that I've mentioned before is this idea that, Paul didn't die of old age like John. In fact, none of the apostles died of old age except John. And I mentioned before that I believe that Paul and his death was God having mercy on him and allowing him to not die of old age, but to just come home already. He had done enough work. 2 Timothy 2:2 taught people who knew how to taught people, who knew how to taught people, who to teach people, that when he had set up that infrastructure of leadership, that God said, okay, you have done the work, and it's ready for you to come home too. And so while Paul lived purposely here for souls, he was always ready to go home. Now, is this a lesson about idolatry? Sure, why not? Is this a lesson about citizenship? Sure, why not? Is this a July the 4th lesson? Sure, why not? Really, this is a lesson about perspective, about never getting so comfortable in this earth that we're at home. We need to live like strangers. We need to live like Christ. Are you comfortable? Are you living like Christ? Jesus invites you to come and to be transformed and to give up the things that aren't going to fulfill you and the things that are temporary, to have a city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. You can do that. You can become a Christian. You can be baptized into Christ. God can add you to the church. You can be part of the eternal kingdom and live a life of purpose, ready every day to go to your real home once you've served your purpose for the Lord. And what a life of fulfillment. There isn't any part of the flesh that we can fully fulfill, but boy, when we live for the Spirit and we live for the eternal purpose, that is a life of true fulfillment, true contentment. And of course, that's where we get into the next chapter in Philippians, where he talks about the power to live that kind of a life, even in a place where you feel like you want to jump out of your skin, a place where you're ready to leave. And maybe you need to come back in some way. Maybe you've allowed something to become so ultimate in your life that you have sacrificed spiritual things for that. He calls us to give that up and to come back for him, to come back to him. Joshua is going to lead us in a song of encouragement. And of course, it's a time where you're invited to make things right and to secure your citizenship, to live in such a way that shows that you are a stranger here. If there's a need that you have, we love you. We want to pray for you if you have any need. So if there's something you need, come as we stand and sing this song of encouragement.